Hey there guys, how's it going? Welcome to a new Call of Duty Top 5 countdown, where today I'm looking at the top 5 most pointless or most useless perks in Call of Duty history. Now, our previous video I looked at the worst perks, and by that I meant most annoying. I didn't really mean ones that weren't very good to use. Now this countdown is actually the ones that I think are the most useless and not very good to use. So these are my top 5 pointless perks. At number 5, I've decided to go with Overkill. This has been in most of the Call of Duties, although it wasn't in Modern Warfare 2 because they had one-man army in that one. Now this allows you to bring 2 primary weapons onto the battlefield, and for me I feel like this one isn't very strong because normally if you're going to use a weapon, say an assault rifle, it's better to actually build your whole perk system and your equipment around using the assault rifle. If you confuse it with another type of weapon like a sniper rifle or an LMG, then you're kind of just not getting the best of either of them. You're kind of going for a mixed bag, a jack of all trades instead of a master of one, and I tend to find that in Call of Duty it's better to go for a master of one style setup other than confusing it. Now sometimes in competitive Call of Duty especially, it's a good combination in search and destroy to start off with a sniper rifle and then maybe a submachine gun for when the close quarters engagements happen at the end, but in general I tend to think this just isn't a very useful perk. Sounds good on paper but practically just isn't that great. At number 4, I've decided to go with Hardwired from Black Ops 2. Now this perk allowed you immunity to the counter UAV as well as any EMPs. Now those aren't bad abilities in their own sense, but the problem with this perk is how often does that scenario really happen? 99 times out of 100 you won't really run into too many counter UAVs and EMPs in one match, and in a actual game where you have scavenger and fast hands in that perk slot, is it really worth taking Hardwired? For me it was kind of useful sometimes, but always as a backup creator class setup. If it turns out the enemy team were spamming counter UAVs, were getting quite a few EMPs, then yeah, maybe have a Hardwired setup tucked away somewhere in your creator class loadouts, but in general 99% of the time this perk was pretty useless and you'd never notice any advantage, whereas you could have scavenger and be getting constant packs, you could be having fast hands and throwing out every piece of equipment really fast. So number 4 is Hardwired. At number 3, I've decided to go with Scrambler from Modern Warfare 2. Now this perk again on paper sounds quite decent. It scrambles the enemy's radar when you are close to them. However, when you are the enemy and an opponent is using Scrambler, the problem is for the enemy is that it gives away their position. So you know that if your UAV is being scrambled that there's someone very close by, and by actually using this you can tend to find out exactly where they are by how strong the signal is. So the closer you got to them, the stronger the signal. So if you were just getting a little bit of blockage, you could tell roughly how far away they were. You know, in one thing in Call of Duty, you don't want to give your position away, and this is something that Scrambler did. Like you said before with Overkill, maybe in Search and Destroy actually this isn't the worst one, a little bit confusing, but in general it's never advantageous to give your position away in Call of Duty, and it's definitely not outweighed by the fact that the enemy's UAV radar is scrambled. So I've gone for number 3, Scrambler. At number 2, I've decided to go with Shades. Now this was a perk in Call of Duty World at War, and the reason this perk was in it is because you had signal flares in that game, which were these flares that you threw out and they had like a bright light surrounding them, made it difficult to see. Now again, on paper this perk doesn't sound too bad, that's not a bad effect to actually have. However, practically how often does this actually come into play? I would say, like similarly to the last perk, 99 times out of 100 in a game you're not really going to be affected by a signal flare, so it's much more kind of desirable to take a perk that's going to be working for you a lot more of the time. You know, the actual usage of this perk isn't terrible, but in practical senses it kind of is, because if you only had a Shades perk setup, you'd be missing out on a lot of opportunities that some of the other perks have, or should I say advantages that the other perks have, and just not making the most of your creator class loadout at all. So number 2 is Shades from World at War. So my number 1 most useless or pointless perk ever in Call of Duty has to be Eavesdrop from Call of Duty 4. Similar to the previous perks, its ability isn't actually that bad, it's just not useful at all. So this gave you the ability to hear the other team's communications via voice if you were close to them. Now obviously when they were kind of conjuring this up, they thought they had visions of people giving away their tactics by, you know, playing Search and Destroy, and then they'd say to a teammate, oh, I'm going to go to A, and then an eavesdrop person would overhear that and react accordingly. but in reality you just normally ended up hearing nothing 99% of the time, especially on the PS3 where hardly anyone used a headset, or maybe you'd hear how many times that the opponent had shagged his teammate's mum the night before. So you would never really get a tactical advantage out of this, and there were some incredible perks in the same perk slot as this, so you would never really want to use this. Again, maybe even in Search and Destroy you might try it out, and that seems to be a bit of a theme with some of these pointless perks. Maybe in that specific game mode they're not too bad, but for me eavesdrop is one that I never really found much advantage of, and I never found out anything interesting from listening to the other team's team chat. So that's it for my number one. I'm going to go with eavesdrop from Call of Duty 4. So that concludes this top 5 Call of Duty countdown. I hope you guys are enjoying this nostalgic look back at the old Call of Duties. Feel free to leave a comment with what you thought were the most pointless perks ever in Call of Duty. I had some others on my list that I didn't actually manage to include, so maybe you thought of them. Put them in the comment section below, as well as leaving comments saying what other top 5s you'd like to see, what other nostalgic things would you like to see from the old Call of Duties. Of course, don't forget to smash the like button as well if you appreciate these videos and you like this series, and don't forget to check out my G2A link down in the description below for cheap PC games, Xbox points and PSN credit, and I'll see you guys next time.